anything that didn't serve the state was denigrated and demoted. And children were taught to snitch on their parents if they heard them say anything derogatory about the regime.
This is part 2 of my interview with Vera Sherav. She is teaming up with Christine Anderson this weekend in Hamilton, Ontario, Saturday, June 17th, where they're premiering Never Again Is Now Global, the docuseries from Vera Sherav. For tickets, you can go to trinityproductions.ca, but let's get into the rest of the interview. It's terrifying to think that there's a whole generation of kids who are told, you know, if you don't wear a mask, you're going to kill people, and like wear a mask every time you go outside. And
don't trust people. Don't trust people.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
I know that by trusting, by using my judgment to trust people, it saved my life in various times. Yeah, that it's the opposite. It's very, very calculated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The entire saga was very, very calculated, and it stripped people of their normal human empathy, you know?
Definitely. Absolutely. A lot of what happened was very inhumane, but
Yes.
I'm curious when you started to speak out about lockdowns and possibly about the dehumanization of unvaccinated people that happened. Was there a moment for you where you decided I really need to start speaking about this and be public about this?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty early at demonstrations in New York that were organized pretty early on. Once I realized that this is really a whole plan, and the way I realized that was simply by seeing, oh my God, all over the world they're doing the same thing. They're all marching. They're all in lockstep.
Yep.
And then I read the report Lockstep, which laid it all out. You see, one of the problems is that people in Germany at the time, they only had radio and newspapers and, the big rallies, but there was no television.
Yeah.
Now, and in the United States, we used to have 50 different broadcasters. Now we have 5.
Mm-hmm.
5 companies own everything, and the news is the same script for every one of them.
Yes.
And the same thing was true in Canada and all of Western Europe, the same thing. The media has been totally controlled by combination. And in the United States, we call them public-private partnerships. That's government and industry.
Mm-hmm.
So it's them against us. And we, during this period, more independent websites have cropped up over the internet than ever before. There's no excuse for not searching out true information, legitimate information. But people somehow are just locked into this casters who are lying to them day and night and keeping the fear level up. This is fear paralyzes people, and they've stopped thinking.
That's a great comparison of comparing it to back in the day when they only had radio and newspaper, and now we have these things. We have these things right here, and everyone has their own TV in their pocket. But I do want to be respectful of your time, and I want to get into the topic of censorship, because you're speaking out and you're saying these things. I was watching the first episode of the series. And
Never Again Is Now Global.
Yes, very, very powerful name. Maybe briefly tell us about this docuseries, how you brought it together.
Well, I realized at a certain point, it's a year ago really, that we have to do something, have to wake people up. And I realized also that I am part of what will be no doubt the last generation who remembers. And so I decided that I want to get to other survivors and see how they're seeing things, each one is very different. Ultimately, I interviewed some 32 people, and that includes survivors, children of survivors and grandchildren of survivors.
Right.
And it turns out that grandchildren often are the only ones to whom the survivor bared their soul. They couldn't do it before. It's very interesting.
That is interesting.
We also I have a grandson of a Nazi scientist.
Oh, wow.
And how he looks at the world today. And we have freedom fighters from Israel and Germany, Netherlands. We have some, scientists and doctors, but they're not the main.
That's great.
Attraction. The main attraction of people.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna put all the information for this docuseries. It's very exciting. And I was watching part of the first episode, and I believe it was Michael Green was speaking, but it relates to something I wanted to ask you about. I'm a media nerd. I pay close attention to what the media does, especially with how they try to censor people and they try to restrict speech. Obviously, a lot of that happened during COVID. And for yourself, or anyone else really, who made this comparison to say, hey, there's actually some parallels here. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, obviously, but there are some parallels here to what's going on with the dehumanization of certain groups and what happened during the Holocaust. And you know what they said? They said, that's anti-Semitic. Yeah. Saying that is anti-Semitic. So I'm curious what Michael Green was saying is, in the name of the Holocaust, they're stifling freedom of speech, they're book burning, and they're censoring people by using the Holocaust. They're almost like weaponizing the Holocaust to shut people up, right? Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. I realized, and in fact, one of the what prompted me to think in terms of doing a documentary was, in fact, Bobby Kennedy was pilloried for raising Anne Frank in a speech. And he was called, anti-Semite. And I thought, what the heck? This is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. The Holocaust, yes, is being weaponized. The narrative is being controlled by those who have an axe of something in it. And of course, what happened really is all religious institutions, all educational institutions, everyone has been bribed. Everyone has been paid off to go according to the narrative. And the Holocaust is being used to shut people up if they dare make comparisons. What they only allow is during memorials, you take out and you talk about the Holocaust. But the fact is that early on, for example, Elie Wiesel, who was an Auschwitz survivor, and he was a Nobel laureate, he was chairman of the President's Commission on the Holocaust. This is before they formed the Holocaust Memorial in Washington. Mm-hmm. And they wrote a report in 1979 to the president. And what they stressed was that the Nazi option for another genocide is very much now, it's alive. And you have to watch out for it. So I follow that directive. In other words, the point is to prevent another Holocaust by stopping early steps before they go beyond early. Mm-hmm. Because the Holocaust didn't start at the beginning when Hitler took power. He took power in January 1933. The final solution wasn't really started to be implemented before 42. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was the last years, in fact, even 44 and 45, they were in a frenzy to carry it out. They slaughtered more people then than before. So it took a long, long time, step by step by step.
And it's very interesting how they tried to control the speech for people who are trying to ring the alarm bells.
Yeah.
And
I feel, and other survivors feel the same way. You see, it's not everyone for sure, but those who are thinking people, those who think about these things, they all see this and they can't understand haven't they learned anything? Well, they haven't learned. The reason they haven't learned is because history isn't taught. Mm-hmm. None of the humanities actually is important now. At universities, they took a backseat to science and technology.
So this is what was happening right now and what was happening in Germany leading up to World War II. It's kind of an interesting parallel, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. I know that you weren't even alive or were very young at the time, but some people bring up Weimar Germany, and they talk about how there was a lot of social decay and there was a lot of degeneracy and this sort of thing, and then it kind of led to this rise of Nazism, I presume. And then today, people make the argument that there is also some social decay. There's a lot of degeneracy as well. Do you, aside from when the propaganda ramped up and Jews started to get rounded up, aside from that kind of pushing point, is there any other kind of patterns or things in society today that people should look out for, that you think is important to note?
Absolutely. There was a concerted effort, again, groupthink. You do what, this was the good for the folk. That time they talked about the folk. And it was really a degradation of human values, of religion. Anything that didn't serve the state was denigrated and demoted. And children were taught to snitch on their parents if they heard them say anything derogatory about the regime. We had children being enticed to take the jab even if their parents didn't want them to. We had children, being bribed with pizza and ice cream and to lie to their parents. In other words, breaking that family cohesion, which is so important. Every mammal, instinctively, you protect your children. And now they're putting a wrench between parents and children. Schools become the important. No.
It's awful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Vera. There's so much more I'd love to ask you about, but we'll have to save it for another time.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me.
Vera Sherav is teaming up with Christine Anderson this weekend, Hamilton, Ontario, June 17th on Saturday. You can get tickets to see the premiere of Vera Sherav's docuseries, Never Again Is Now Global. And then there's also a Q&A with Christine Anderson live in Hamilton, Ontario. If you want to check out this event, go to trinityproductions.ca for tickets. And if you missed part 1 of the interview, you can check it out here. Aside from that, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.